I remember the smell of antiseptic and something else, something metallic that clung to the back of my throat as I woke from the anesthesia. The hospital walls were that particular shade of pale green that seems to exist nowhere else in the world, and through the window, I could see the sun beginning its descent, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. I was 73 years old, and I had just undergone gallbladder surgery. Nothing too serious, the doctors had assured me, but at my age everything feels serious. Every procedure carries with it the weight of mortality, the quiet understanding that your body is no longer the faithful servant it once was. The nurse, a kind woman with tired eyes and gentle hands, had asked me earlier if someone would be coming to pick me up. I had smiled and told her yes, of course, my daughter would be here, Sarah, my eldest, the one I had sacrificed everything for, the one whose diapers I changed in the middle of the night while working 2 jobs, the one whose college tuition I paid by selling the only thing of value I owned, my mother's pearl necklace. I had 3 children, you see, but Sarah was the one who lived closest, just 20 minutes away in the suburbs. Michael was in California, building his tech empire, and Jenny was in New York, dancing in a company she'd dreamed of since she was 5 years old. I was proud of them all, fiercely proud, but it was Sarah I expected to see that evening. I called her from the hospital phone, my fingers trembling slightly as I dialed the number I knew by heart. It rang 3 times before she answered, and I could hear the television in the background, some cooking show with cheerful music. "Mum," she said, and there was something in her voice, something I couldn't quite place. "How did the surgery go?" I told her it went well, that the doctor was pleased, that I was ready to be discharged but needed someone to drive me home. There was a pause, long enough that I thought perhaps the connection had been lost. Then she said, "Mom, I can't make it today. Brandon has soccer practice, and I'm the team mom this season. I have to be there." I felt something crack inside my chest, something small and fragile. I told myself it was just the post-surgery soreness, but I knew better. "Can't your husband take him?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Another pause. "He's at work, Mom. He can't just leave. Maybe Michael could help." I wanted to laugh, but it would have hurt too much. "Michael 3,000 miles away. He's in California, sweetheart," I said quietly. "What about tomorrow?" she asked, as if I were a package that could be held at the post office for pickup at a more convenient time. "The hospital needs to discharge me today," I said, and I could hear the weakness in my own voice, the way it wavered like an old radio losing its signal. She sighed, that particular sigh children reserve for inconvenient parents, and said she would try to figure something out. She never called back. I sat in that hospital room as the sun disappeared completely, and the fluorescent lights took over, harsh and unforgiving. The nurse checked on me twice, her eyes asking questions her mouth was too polite to voice. I called Michael, even though I knew it was pointless. He was sympathetic, loving even, but he was also 3,000 miles and a 6-hour flight away. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he said, and I could hear he meant it. "Let me pay for a car service, something comfortable." Jenny didn't answer when I called. She was probably in rehearsal, her phone tucked away in her dance bag, her body moving to music I couldn't hear. The nurse eventually helped me arrange a medical transport service. I rode home in the back of a van with 2 other people, an elderly man who smelled of cigarettes and old newspapers, and a middle-aged woman who cried silently the entire way. The driver was professional but distant, and when we arrived at my small house with its peeling blue paint and overgrown garden, he helped me to the door and was gone before I could even thank him properly. I stood in my entryway, my keys heavy in my hand, and looked at the home I had maintained for 47 years, the home where I had raised 3 children after their father died of a heart attack when Sarah was 12, Michael was 9, and Jenny was only 6. The home I had kept warm and full of love even when the heating bill meant I wore 2 sweaters through winter, and ate soup 3 nights a week. The house felt different that night, empty in a way it had never been before. I made my way to the couch and lowered myself down carefully, every movement a negotiation with pain. I didn't cry. I was too tired to cry, too stunned by the casual way my daughter had dismissed me, as if my need was merely an inconvenience, a scheduling conflict to be resolved later. I slept fitfully that night, waking every few hours to the sound of my own breathing in the dark. The days that followed were perhaps the loneliest of my life, and I had known loneliness before. I had been lonely in my marriage sometimes, when my husband worked late and the children were asleep, and the house felt like a ship floating in an endless sea. I had been lonely after he died, when the bed felt too big and the silence too loud, but this was different. This was the loneliness of being forgotten, of realizing that the people you built your entire life around had built their lives in a different direction, and you were not part of the blueprint. Sarah called 3 days later, her voice bright and cheerful, asking how I was feeling. I told her I was managing. She didn't apologize for not picking me up. She talked about Brandon's soccer game, about how he had scored a goal and she had captured it on video. She asked if I wanted her to send it to me. I said yes, because what else could I say? The video never came. I spent my recovery alone, shuffling from room to room like a ghost in my own house. The neighborhood ladies brought casseroles, bless them, Mrs. Henderson with her tuna noodle, and Mrs. Park with her kimchi stew. They sat with me for a while, made small talk about the weather and the new family moving in down the street. But they had their own lives, their own families, and eventually, they left, and I was alone again. It was during the second week of my recovery that I found the letters. I had been cleaning out the hall closet, moving slowly, taking breaks every few minutes, when I knocked over an old shoebox from the top shelf. It tumbled down, spilling its contents across the hardwood floor. Photographs, greeting cards, and a stack of letters bound with a rubber band. I recognized Sarah's handwriting immediately. I shouldn't have read them. I knew that even as I picked up the first one, even as my fingers trembled breaking the seal on an envelope addressed to her husband, Mark, but I was lonely and hurt and hungry for some connection to the daughter, who had once been my entire world. The letter was dated from 10 years ago, written during a rough patch in their marriage, I assumed, but as I read, my blood turned cold. I can't keep doing this, she had written, the kids, the house, Mom constantly needing something. She called 3 times today asking me to help her with her computer, then her taxes, then wondering if I could drive her to the pharmacy. I know she's alone, I know she's lonely, but I'm drowning, Mark. I'm drowning, and she's an anchor pulling me down. Sometimes I wish she would just go into a home or something. Somewhere with people paid to care about her stories about the past and her constant needs. I sat on the floor surrounded by fallen photographs and read letter after letter, each one a small knife wound to my heart. Letters complaining about me, about how I always wanted to see the grandchildren, about how I called too often, about how guilty she felt, but how exhausted she was by my existence. There was one letter that mentioned Michael and Jenny. How they were smart enough to put distance between themselves and Mom's neediness. How she wished she could do the same but felt trapped by proximity and obligation. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough for the afternoon light to fade, long enough for my legs to go numb beneath me. I thought about every time I had called Sarah, every favor I had asked, every moment I had needed her. Had I been too much? Had I clung too tightly to the children I had devoted my life to? I thought about the years after their father died, how I had worked as a secretary during the day and cleaned offices at night, to make sure they had everything they needed. How I had sewn Jenny's dance costumes by hand, because we couldn't afford to buy them. How I had driven Michael to coding camp every summer, an hour each way, because he loved computers and I wanted him to have every opportunity. How I had helped Sarah through her difficult pregnancy with Brandon. Cooking meals and cleaning her house and holding her hand when she was scared. But maybe that was the problem. Maybe I had given so much that they had learned to take without thinking. Maybe I had loved so fiercely that they never learned to love me back with the same intensity. Or maybe, and this thought was the most painful of all, maybe this is just what happens. You raise your children, you pour everything into them, and then they grow up and build their own lives, and you become a peripheral character in a story that was once entirely yours. I put the letters back in the box. I didn't confront Sarah about them. What would be the point? She would apologize, probably, tell me they were written in moments of frustration, that she didn't really mean those things. But words written in private often carry more truth than words spoken in person. Those letters were her real feelings, the ones she had never dared to say to my face. Something changed in me after that. I stopped calling as often. When Sarah called me, I kept the conversations short, pleasant but distant. I didn't ask to see the grandchildren. I didn't ask for help with anything. I hired someone to help with my grocery shopping, a young man from a local service who was kind and efficient, and didn't make me feel like a burden. I joined a senior center and started playing bridge on Thursdays with a group of women who had their own stories of disappointment and resilience. Sarah noticed the change, of course. "Mom, you seem distant," she said one day, about 3 months after the surgery. "Is everything okay?" I told her everything was fine. She asked if I was angry about her not picking me up from the hospital. I said no. I understood she was busy. "You can tell me if you're upset," she pressed. But I couldn't. Because what I had learned in those letters wasn't just that she found me burdensome. It was that she resented me for needing her at all, and there was no way to need someone less without actually needing them not at all. A year passed, then 2. My health improved, and I grew stronger, more independent. I took up watercolor painting and discovered I had a small talent for it. I painted the ocean, though I lived hours from the sea, because I liked the way the water seemed to go on forever, endless and free. Sarah visited sometimes, always with apologies about how long it had been, always promising to come more often. I smiled and served tea and asked about the children and never, ever told her that I had read those letters. It was Michael who finally brought everything into focus. He came to visit for my 76th birthday, flying in from California with gifts and stories and that easy charm he'd always had. We were sitting in the garden, watching the evening fall when he said, "You know, Mom, Sarah tells me you've been different lately." Pulling back, I sipped my tea and said nothing. "She's worried about you," he continued. "She thinks maybe you're depressed." I laughed then, a sound that surprised both of us. "I'm not depressed," I said. "I'm just learning to take up less space." He looked confused, so I explained about the surgery, about being refused, about the letters I'd found. I watched his face change, watched him process this information about his sister, about me, about the complicated architecture of family love and obligation. "Mum," he said finally, "I'm sorry. We all got so caught up in our own lives that we forgot you weren't just Mom, you were also Margaret. A person with needs and feelings beyond what you could give us." It was perhaps the most honest conversation I'd had with any of my children in years. Now I'm 78 years old, and I've made my peace with the way things are. Sarah still calls weekly, still visits monthly, still loves me in the way she's capable of loving. Michael sends money and calls from California, always cheerful, always interested. Jenny finally married a choreographer, and sends photos of their life in New York, all bright lights and beautiful movement. I love them all, deeply and completely, but I've learned that love doesn't always equal devotion, and devotion doesn't always equal presence. The house is quieter now, but I've learned to find peace in the silence. Mrs. Henderson passed away last year, and I miss her tuna noodle casseroles and her gentle company. Mrs. Park moved to Seattle to be near her daughter. New neighbors came and went, and I waved from my porch but didn't try to make close friends. Some chapters close, and that's okay. Last month, I updated my will. I left the house to be sold and the proceeds divided equally among my 3 children, because despite everything, they are still my children and I still want them to have something. But I also left a letter to be read after I'm gone, a letter that tells the truth about that day at the hospital, about the letters I found, about the loneliness I felt. Not to hurt them, but because they should know. They should understand that parents are people too, fragile and vulnerable and capable of being wounded. They should know that independence isn't always strength. Sometimes it's just the armor we wear when we realize no one is coming to save us. I think about that day in the hospital often, that moment when I realized I was truly alone. It felt like the end of something then, and I suppose it was. It was the end of the mother I had been, the woman who believed that unconditional love would be returned in kind. But it was also the beginning of something else, a quieter, smaller life, but one that belonged entirely to me. I paint my oceans, I read my books, I tend my garden, I am no longer waiting for the phone to ring or for the door to open. I have learned to be enough for myself, and sometimes, when the light is just right and the house is very quiet, I am almost happy. Almost. Because there's a particular kind of sadness that comes with realizing your children will never know you the way you know them, will never love you with the same fierce totality you loved them with. But that's the bargain we make when we become parents, isn't it? We give everything, expecting nothing, and still somehow hoping for more than nothing. We pour ourselves out completely, and our children drink deeply and move on, and we're left holding the empty cup, wondering where all that love went. The sun is setting now as I tell this story, painting my walls in that same amber and rose I saw from the hospital window all those years ago. I am old, I am alone, but I am here. And perhaps that's enough, perhaps that has to be enough. Because in the end, we all die alone anyway, no matter how many children we bore or how fiercely we loved them. The surgery wasn't what broke me. I was already broken, I just hadn't noticed. The refusal was just the moment the cracks finally showed through.